Chapter 17. The headache was insistent, pounding just firmly enough at the back of her temples to make everything seem like a chore. Cindy squeezed her eyes shut, turning away from the crowd that was gathering in the staff kitchen. It was only mid-morning. How on earth would she make it through the rest of the day, and then on to Nicholas's school production that evening? She flicked her wrist, checking the time and deciding she'd be okay to pop one more tablet. Hopefully that would ease the pain. "You're very quiet." Vanya patted her on the back a little too enthusiastically, just as she was gulping from a mug. Cindy spluttered droplets of water across the sink. "Oh." Her supervisor noticed her packet of painkillers. "You're not well?" "Just a minor headache," Cindy smiled. "It's nothing." "Glad to hear it. And I've also heard that you've been getting creative with your photos. I can't wait to see them." "Yes?" Cindy hesitated. "Michael phoned me last night." Vanya laughed at her obvious confusion. "He said he caught up with you yesterday and gave you some tips. Apparently your work is excellent." Cindy nodded, but anxiety rose in her chest. Why would her tutor have told her boss that he'd been helping her? What else had he said? "Yes, he just happened to be stopping by the Docklands and very generously offered to take a look at some of my work." "Oh, good. We used to study together, you know. Actually, we dated for a while. I'm sure he told you." "Yes," Cindy blatantly lied, wondering how to end the conversation when, thankfully, a boisterous chant rang out. "Speech! Speech! Speech!" Her colleagues were gathered around a high bench, watching Pratesh from the IT department cut through a birthday cake. As he pulled the knife out, several people clapped. Cindy kept a smile fixed to her face, but deep down she found the whole scenario quite odd. She'd never worked at a place where birthdays were deemed worthy of interrupting an entire office. Surely you got to a certain age where you just privately acknowledged the milestone and moved on. "Here you go." Clambering up to a stool, Cindy accepted a piece of the disgustingly sweet-looking mud cake and prodded it with a plastic fork. At least this was stopping her from having to do any actual work. "You're the new photographer, aren't you?" A woman in a bright orange blazer introduced herself. "You're a bit of an enigma around here, but I've seen you coming in and out." "Yes." Cindy forced herself to laugh. "I'm trying to capture all the different precincts in the Docklands, like the tourist hub and the Moonee Ponds Creek. But I'm a bit dependent on the weather holding out." The woman chuckled. "Oh, well, you can't have had much fun this week. I feel like it's rained every day." Cindy pushed a chunk of cake around her plate. She was just pulling out her phone to decline an offer of lunch with Michael when her colleague continued. "Actually, weren't those 2 murdered women found somewhere by that creek? You know, the ones that have been all over the news?" Cindy raised her eyebrows. She knew they were found in the Docklands, but she hadn't stopped to consider exactly where. "I didn't realize that. What part of the creek?" "I'm not sure exactly. Have you seen any police around?" "No." Cindy thought back to her drizzly walk with Michael and their unusual encounter with Jordan, who'd been so desperate for her to join him in photographing trains. "Don't bother going too much further up that way. There's lots of homeless people, and it gets a bit grubby." Her tutor had warned her away. But how much further would she have had to walk to come across the crime scene? "Well, I don't suppose you'd be wanting to photograph that anyway," the woman snorted. 2 dead bodies and a whole lot of police tape is hardly a good look for the area." "No," Cindy agreed, distracted by another thought. Jordan was always hanging around that area. Could he have seen something? When the woman finally diverted her attention to someone else, Cindy sat her phone on the table, searching for information on the murders. A news article referenced the Macaulay train stop. "The trains never run early at Macaulay Station, but this one did." Jordan's earnest words rang in her ears. Cindy opened her maps. Macaulay Station sat directly underneath the Tullamarine Freeway. She zoomed in. There was the creek, running parallel to the train track. "I'd better keep working," she murmured to no one in particular, before standing up and throwing her plastic plate in the bin. Leaving the staff room, Cindy headed straight to her desk, grabbing her camera bag and slinging it over one shoulder. Her flushed reflection stared back at her from inside the elevator, and she placed a palm on her sweaty forehead. She was so hot. Hopefully the drugs would kick in soon. Turning left out of the building, she followed the bike path that dipped down to join the creek. She hadn't intended to be outside today, but now she desperately wanted to find her young friend. Her mind was racing. "If you come to Macaulay Station, you can get really good pictures." It wasn't impossible that Jordan had seen something. "Okay, grab something to eat and then let's get started." Emmett looked at the meagre plate of pastries he'd bought from the coffee shop downstairs, hoping the quick sugar hit would be enough to keep his small team going through what was turning into another long, busy day. Once they were settled, he cleared his throat. "This morning, Tadio and I conducted a formal interview with Daniel Norman. He was not able to provide any reasonable alibi for the Saturday evening when his sister was murdered, or for the Friday when Natalie Gibson disappeared. His best recollection is that he was watching football on television at home during the 2-hour window when Rosemary was killed, and that he was again at home on the afternoon that Natalie vanished. He has no one who can verify this." Emmett paused. In front of him, Bianca leant over to compare notes with Ted. "Given this result, we will continue to monitor Daniel Norman as a potential suspect. Are we able to get our cyber team to go through his online history, Medhurst?" Ted raised a thumb. "And how have we been going on the victim's background checks?" Morton licked his fingertips before wiping his hands on his trousers. "Nothing much to report. No criminal records, nothing in their work history. I think Carter was doing the rest." Emmett looked to Stephen, who was staring determinedly at the ground. It was obvious the young policeman hadn't recovered from the grilling he'd received over the debacle with Rosemary Norman's phone. "Carter?" "Yes?" Stephen coughed awkwardly. "I've gone through most of the financial records, and there's not much in it. I'm almost finished with their educational backgrounds." "Okay." Emmett frowned. He was still furious with his young colleague. "Now, we've had quite a good response from the public following yesterday's media conference. Tadio, did you want to go over that?" "Sure." Bianca took the liberty of standing up and joining Emmett at the front. "Since yesterday afternoon, we've had numerous calls into the hotline to report sightings of both our victims in the days prior to their deaths. Medhurst and I have been combing through these, and one we are extremely interested in is an anonymous taxi driver who told operators he picked Ms. Norman up from Flemington on Saturday evening, and dropped her off at Ackland Street in St Kilda. Unfortunately, it appears the taxi was simply flagged down off the street rather than being booked, and the caller didn't leave his details." Bianca flicked through her notes. "The reason we're so interested in this call is because the suggested route matches the recorded movements of Ms. Norman's phone, which was shown to have left Flemington at around 6 p.m, when it then started pinging through West Melbourne and the city, before registering in St Kilda. Given we know Ms. Norman died between 7:30 and 9:30 that night, we can presume she was killed somewhere around that Ackland Street area. Medhurst is going to cross-check these movements with phone data from both Daniel Norman and Natalie Gibson, and he will let us know straight away if there are any similarities." Check Brian Gibson's phone records as well, Emmett said to Ted, who made a note. Have you gone on to the taxi operators? Morton splayed his legs wider across his chair. They all have cameras these days. Yes, thank you, Morton. Emmett noticed Bianca try to conceal a grimace. We have contacted taxi operators, and they are all cooperating with our requests to access their security footage. We are also going to conduct a door knock of the Ackland Street area immediately after this meeting. Morton patted his stomach. What about Rosemary's phone? Emmett watched Stephen shuffle uncomfortably. We've had a fairly significant development on that front. He took over from Bianca. Carter and myself will be meeting with a person who claims to have Ms. Norman's phone later this afternoon. We have arranged backup from Uniform around the area, and we are confident of retrieving the handset. If we do, that could be our biggest lead so far. I've alerted forensics to the possibility of having this evidence as early as this afternoon, and they'll be ready to begin testing immediately. Emmett turned back to Morton. Williams, what's next on your plate? The detective yawned and stretched his arms behind him. Well, I'll need to go over some of my notes, and then I'll help Carter with the education checks. I won't need help. I've already done most of it, Stephen snapped. Okay. Emmett looked at his notes, pondering the best way to use the free detective. We could really use an extra person with our door knock. Bianca shuffled forward again. It shouldn't take more than a few hours, and the more help we have, the quicker we can get it done. Morton shook his head. I'd be happy to help, but I'd only hold you up. I need to go over these notes first. Nonsense. Bianca couldn't contain her sly smile. How long could that possibly take? We'll meet you downstairs in 20 minutes. They'd gone through their plan several times, but still, Stephen was anxious. It didn't help that his boss had barely spoken during their short drive out to Flemington. And now, as they pulled into a park directly opposite a rundown chicken shop, the policeman felt like he was going to burst. Stop jiggling your legs like that, Emmett suddenly snapped without looking from the windscreen. You've been fidgeting the whole trip. Sorry. Stephen planted the soles of his feet firmly on the floor. Emmett sighed. Look, I know I've been giving you a hard time, but you need to focus now. If you get this phone for us, nothing else will matter. Stephen nodded mutely, but he knew the knot in his stomach wouldn't ease until the vital piece of evidence was safely in his hands. Any messages? Emmett tapped his fingers on the steering wheel. No. Okay, I might go in. Remember to let me know of any updates. Stephen watched as his boss slipped out of the car, looking both ways before dashing across the road and entering the fast food restaurant. Through the finger-streaked windows, he saw him stroll up to the counter, ordering a large meal before casually claiming a table by the door. Stephen peered down the busy road, observing mothers pushing prams and tradies knocking off for the day. No one seemed particularly interested in the chicken shop. Checking the time on the dashboard, he leant back in his seat, closing his eyes and again mentally rehearsing his conversation with the mystery person. He wiped his brow. Every time he played the scene in his head, it always ended with the person darting for the door. Too quick for either him or Emmett to catch. The precious handset disappearing for good. He opened his eyes and forced himself to take a long, slow breath. It will be fine. But as the agreed meeting time came and went, Stephen's anxiety increased. Was he in the right place? He checked his phone. Finally, some contact. Bit late, be there soon. Stephen bit his lower lip. What did soon mean? 5 minutes? Half an hour? 1 hour? He looked through the chicken shop windows to his boss, who was struggling to drag out the consumption of what must now be a very cold meal. "No problem. Let me know when you're here." Propping his handset conspicuously on his lap, he flicked the radio on, then turned it off. There was no point trying to relax. He just had to ride this out, anxiety and all. From the left of the road, the mothers pushing their prams were returning, each with extra little helpers. Up the side of the restaurant, 3 schoolboys meandered, kicking a soccer ball. Stephen watched them for a while, marvelling at their agile frames, and chuckling as he remembered having to play soccer against a similarly fit group of newly arrived refugees when he was a junior officer, their fast footwork too much for his self-taught technique. He turned his attention back to the schoolboys before suddenly realising that only 2 of them were now marching up Mount Alexander Road. Where had the other gone? Stephen craned his neck. The 3rd boy, the tallest of the lot, had ducked into the chicken shop. Tingling, Stephen sat up, a rush of energy kicking his body back to life. But he slumped back down in his seat when he saw the teen had gone to the counter, ordering himself an unhealthy snack to eat on his way home from school, no doubt. As he waited, a worrying thought started to niggle. What if the message was a hoax? What if the person never had any intention of turning up? He checked his phone again, surprised to see that a new text message had arrived. "Here. Where are you?" With clammy palms, he leant forward over the glove box, squinting to see inside the shop. He was sure that the only person inside the store, other than his boss, was the schoolboy he'd watched enter just a few minutes ago. His breath quickened. Could that be him? It must be. Coming now. With one last big gulp of air, Stephen left the car, drew his shoulders back, and stalked across the road. It will be fine. He checked his reflection as he pulled at the grubby door handle, ignoring Emmett and heading straight to the teenager, who was sitting facing him, slurping a soft drink. They locked eyes and Stephen smiled. "Hi." He slid onto the rubbery seat opposite. "Do you have the money?" the boy mumbled, his eyes darting nervously to the door. "Yes." Stephen made no attempt to withdraw his wallet, instead using the time to sum up the boy opposite. Though he was tall and physically well developed, he couldn't have been more than 15 or 16, his glowing round cheeks giving away his youth. Through the windows beyond, Stephen could see several men casually chatting by their cars in the small parking lot. That must be the cover Emmett had promised. The boy slurped his drink again. "Give me the money and I'll give you the phone." "I'd like to see that you actually have the phone before I do that. It's very important to my friend that she gets it back. Show me the money first." Stephen slowly retrieved the wad of cash he'd bundled together, sitting it just high enough above the table for the boy to see it. "Now show me you have the phone." The boy's eyes danced around the restaurant. For a moment, they seemed to linger on Emmett. "Here," he eventually said, removing a phone from his pocket and gripping it with both hands as though Stephen might reach over and yank it from him. "I didn't break the screen. You don't get a discount for that." "That's fine. Here you go." Stephen slid the money across the table, aware of the worried gaze of the counter staff. The teen took the money and flipped the notes, his eyes wide. Stephen was just reaching to take the phone when the boy bolted, bouncing off his seat with such vigour he practically leapfrogged the table. "No." "Stop right there!" Emmett's growl was followed by a resounding thud as he pinned the boy to the ground. Someone behind the counter screamed. Stephen watched as Emmett wrestled the precious handset from the teen's desperate grip. A wave of relief flooded his body. They had Rosemary Norman's phone. He hadn't messed this up. The boy stood with his feet apart, his body hunched forward uncomfortably. Bend your knees a bit more. Now shuffle your hands closer together. Try taking a swing. No, not like that. Here. The boy let Tom tug the bat from his sweaty grip. His friend had been trying to teach him cricket for weeks now, and he was still struggling to get the basics. See? Tom moved with an ease that made the bat seem like an extension of his body, rather than the cumbersome object he'd been fighting against. Try again. The boy frowned, carefully lining his grip up with the spine of the bat, gently swinging it back and forth. Good! Tom's eyes sparkled. Now try hitting a few balls. Focusing intently, the boy watched as the heavy red ball came flying towards him. Smack! He struck it as hard as he could. Was that good? He dropped the bat excitedly, expecting to see Tom running off somewhere in the distance, hurriedly chasing the ball. Instead, his friend was standing on the spot, giggling helplessly. You're meant to hit it forwards, not backwards. The boy turned to see the ball lying sadly in the back of the nets. How had that even happened? Don't worry. Tom walked over and patted him on the shoulder. Have another go. Maybe I should try throwing the ball instead? Okay. Tom passed him the red ball. But remember, this is my special signed ball, so you have to be careful. And it's called bowling, not throwing. The boy shrugged, taking the red ball. It wasn't his fault he wasn't as good as the other kids at sport. The stupid old couple never let him play outdoors. And he'd been too scared to join in at Maria's place. How come you're so good at this? He asked, as Tom took his position at the crease. My brother Daniel taught me to play. We practice in our backyard every day, and when we're older, we're both going to be in the Australian cricket team. Then we'll be famous and on TV. Wow. The boy had never thought about being a famous cricket player. Maybe he would like to do that too. Walking to the end of the net, he wound his arm up, just like he'd seen Tom doing. Hey, look! Scott's loud voice carried over the edge of the oval. The loser kids are trying to play cricket! The boy felt his fingers release their grip. Oh no. He held his breath as he watched Tom's special red ball go sailing through the air. Thunk. It bounced off the edge of a metal garbage bin, spinning sideways, and landing at Scott's feet. That's a real cricket ball, Scott crowed, picking it up. And it's signed by Jeff Slater. Give it back, Tom yelled, rushing to the edge of the netting. That's mine. It's ours now, Scott grinned, throwing the ball up and down a few times before he and his mates took off. The boy felt his lips tremble. Why had he been so stupid? In front of him, Tom's face had turned red. The trembling got worse. He wished he'd never bothered to try to play cricket. Now his friend wouldn't like him anymore. Before Tom could get angry, the boy turned and ran. He ran as fast as he could, cutting across the oval and over the far side of the big wooden playground. When he was far enough away, he slipped down the side of the big kids' music hall, following the fence until it connected with the drain. There, he slowed down, carefully pushing his way through the bushes until he found his prickly tree. Under the safety of its arching canopy, the boy knelt on the ground, sobbing and catching his breath. He'd just managed to find himself a stone with a decent pointy end when he heard rustling. What are you doing in here? Tom's bright face poked through the spiky branches. The boy sniffed. I thought you'd be mad at me. His friend's freckly nose scrunched. I am mad. But not with you. Tom dropped onto all fours and crawled in to meet him. This is a good hiding spot you've got. What are you doing with that stone? The boy placed his left hand flat on the ground and carefully carved a deep line into the soft skin around the base of his index finger. Then he cut another, and another, and another. Wow! Tom's eyes were wide as the boy held up the bloody diamond he'd created, just like the shape on the playing card he'd used to burn Maria's house. Do you want one too? The boy asked. His friend hesitated before tentatively placing his left hand out. When the mark was done, the boys looked at their matching cuts, gleaming bright. We're blood brothers now, Tom whispered. Yes. The boy's chest swelled with pride.